This broadcast is part of a fictional program. The station and events depicted are not real. This audio is created for narrative and entertainment purposes only.
This is LWB 1713 AM last warning broadcast. If you can hear this transmission, conditions have already escalated beyond control.
Somebody needs to be recording this, so it's going to be me. My name is Marcus Vale. I'm a communications operator at the Cedar Flats Deep Space Support Complex, a satellite tracking station about 90 miles east of nowhere. If you've never heard of us, that's on purpose. We're a relay node. We don't discover things. We don't announce things. We point big dishes at faint spacecraft, and we pass their whispers up the chain to people with better job titles than mine. At 3:14 this morning, one of our dishes started receiving a signal from a spacecraft that does not exist. I want to be precise about that, because precise is the only thing keeping me steady right now. I'm not saying we picked up something we couldn't identify. We pick up junk all the time. Old debris, a dead battery satellite tumbling and catching sunlight, a cosmic ray hitting the detector just wrong. That's normal. That's Tuesday. This was not that. This was a clean, structured, repeating carrier tone coming from a fixed point in the sky, roughly 400,000 kilometers out, beyond the moon. And it was using an old handshake protocol, the electronic equivalent of a spacecraft raising its hand and saying, "I'm here. Are you listening? Please acknowledge." The protocol it used was retired in 1978. I need you to sit with that for a second, the way I had to. Because when a signal comes in using a format that hasn't been transmitted by any human vehicle in almost 50 years, there are only two options. Either someone is running a very expensive, very pointless prank aimed at an unmarked dish in the desert at 3 in the morning, or the thing sending it is old. I ran the diagnostics first. That's the job. You don't panic. You don't call your supervisor and say, "I think it's aliens." You check your own equipment, because 99 times out of 100 the anomaly is you. I checked the receiver chain. Clean. I checked for a ground loop, for local interference, for a phone somebody left too close to the low noise amplifier. Nothing. I swung the dish 2 degrees off the source, and the signal dropped exactly the way a real signal drops when you stop pointing at it. That's the test that mattered. A glitch stays with you. A real object stays out there in space where you left it. I swung back. It was still there, still ringing. I logged it. Time, azimuth, elevation, frequency. My hands were fine. I want that in the record, too, that at 3:14, and at 3:20, and at 3:31, my hands were completely steady, because I still thought this was a puzzle with an answer. The tone had a pattern inside it. Not random, not noise. A short, structured burst, a gap, and then the same burst again, every 11 seconds. 11 seconds, exactly, to the millisecond, which no natural process does. Natural things wobble. This didn't wobble. I want to describe the sound because this is going to be an audio record, and the sound is the part I can't stop hearing. When I patched it to the monitor speaker, it came through as a low, even pulse. Like a heartbeat, if you slowed a heartbeat down and made it out of metal. Steady, patient, like it had been doing this for a very long time and had no reason to hurry. I sat alone in a room full of screens and listened to a thing beyond the moon knock every 11 seconds, and I told myself out loud, okay, there's an explanation. I still believe there's an explanation. I just don't think it's one I'm going to like. At 0341, I did what the procedure says to do with an unidentified structured signal. I escalated it. I called the duty officer at the Regional Coordination Center and I told him, as calmly as I could, that Cedar Flats was holding a hard lock on something that shouldn't be there. He asked me to say the frequency twice. Then he went very quiet. And that quiet told me more than anything he said after. The duty officer's name is Reyes. Good man, 22 years in. The kind who's seen enough false alarms that nothing rattles him. When I read him the frequency the second time, he didn't tell me to recheck my equipment. He didn't laugh. He said, "Hold the lock. Do not lose it. I'm calling someone." That's when I knew this was already bigger than my dish. Because here's the thing about a man like Reyes. If he thought I'd made a mistake, he'd have said so. He'd have walked me back through the checklist in that patient, slightly bored voice he uses when a new operator gets spooked by space weather. Instead, he asked me to hold, and then I heard him breathing on the open line while he dialed something on another phone. And the number he dialed was long. International long. While he was gone, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I started trying to decode the burst pattern myself. Understand, I'm not a cryptographer. I'm a comms tech. But I've spent 11 years listening to machines talk to each other, and you develop a feel for structure the way a mechanic develops a feel for an engine that's about to throw a rod. And the structure inside that 11-second pulse was, I don't have a better word, layered. There was the carrier, the thing raising its hand. But underneath it, riding along, there was a slower modulation. A second message inside the first, moving so slowly you'd only catch it if you stacked hundreds of pulses on top of each other and looked at the average. So I stacked them. I let it run, and I averaged the pulses. And after about 4 minutes of accumulation, a shape started rising up out of the noise floor. It was a countdown. I need to be careful here, because countdown is a scary word, and I don't want to make it sound scarier than it is. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't a bomb movie clock. It was a value inside the signal that decreased by a fixed amount with every single pulse. Every 11 seconds, the number went down. And it was decreasing towards zero at a rate that, if it held, would reach zero in a little under 4 days. 4 days. I sat there with that on my screen, and I did the most human thing possible, which is I decided I was wrong. I decided I was pattern matching noise, seeing a face in a cloud, because the human brain is a machine for finding meaning in static, and mine had been staring at a screen since midnight. I told myself, you're tired, Marcus. You're seeing a countdown, because at 3 a.m. everything looks like a countdown. Then Reyes came back on the line, and his voice had changed, flattened out, the way a voice goes when a person is reading carefully from something. He said, Cedar Flats, I need you to confirm. Are you seeing a decreasing value in the subcarrier? I said yes. There was a pause I could have driven a truck through. He said, okay, don't touch anything. People are getting on planes. I asked him, people from where? He didn't answer that directly. He said the object had a preliminary designation now, and that it wasn't new, that it had been flagged before, not by us, by an observatory, years ago, as a faint, non-reflective, station-keeping mass in a stable position beyond lunar distance. Something that just sat there. No thrust, no signal, no change. A rock, everyone assumed. A weird, dark, boring rock that nobody had budget to look at twice. It was quiet, Reyes said. For as long as we've been able to look, it was completely quiet. It's not a new arrival, Marcus. It's been parked out there the whole time. I asked him the only question that mattered. So what changed? And Reyes said, in that flat, careful reading voice, we think something turned it on. Then he told me to keep the recording running and to not, under any circumstances, transmit a reply. Do not transmit a reply. I want to talk about that order because it's the first thing tonight that genuinely frightened me. And I think if you understand why, you'll understand everything that came after. At a tracking station, replying is the whole job. Spacecraft ping us, we ping back. That's the handshake, that's the conversation. That's how a probe 2 billion miles away knows its commands got through. Not replying is unnatural. It goes against every reflex I've built over 11 years. When something raises its hand and says, are you listening? Your entire body wants to say yes, and they were telling me not to. Reyes wouldn't say why. He said it came from above him. And I believe him, because Reyes doesn't hide behind above me. Unless it's true. But I could fill in the blank myself, and so can you. If a thing has been sitting silent beyond the moon for as long as we've had eyes, and it suddenly wakes up and starts asking whether anyone's home, the last thing you want to do is answer the door before you know what's standing on the other side of it. So I sat on my hands. Literally. I put both hands flat on the desk, away from the transmit controls, and I watched the number go down. Around 0430, the first outside confirmation came in, and this is when it stopped being my problem and started being the world's. A second station picked it up. Then a third. An observatory in Chile swung an optical telescope to the coordinates and got back something that made the whole coordination channel go silent for almost a full minute. Because optically visually, with a real telescope, in real light there was an object there. And it was not the size of the faint dark mass anyone had catalogued. It was bigger. A lot bigger. The catalog said a few 100 meters across. The telescope was saying kilometers. Something that had, at some point in the years since anyone last bothered to measure it, gotten larger, or unfolded, or was never as small as we thought because it had been sitting edge on, presenting the thinnest possible profile, the way you turn sideways in a doorway to take up less space. I keep coming back to that image and I can't shake it. Something out there that knew how to not be seen. The Chile data also gave us shape, and the shape is where the boring rock theory died for good. It wasn't round. It wasn't a lumpy potato like an asteroid. It had structure, long straight edges, a symmetry that natural objects don't have, and a central darkness that didn't reflect sunlight at all, like a hole cut in the sky where a thing should be. Somebody on the coordination channel, an astronomer, said the word manufactured, and then immediately took it back and said, "We can't say that yet." And you could hear in his voice that he only took it back because saying it out loud made it real. By 5 o'clock, there were more voices on the channel than I could track. Agencies I won't name. Accents from 3 continents. Everybody talking over the pulse, which I'd left running on my monitor speaker the whole time, so that underneath every panicked expert there was this steady patient knock. 11 seconds. 11 seconds. The number going down. And through all of it, the standing order held. Nobody replies. Nobody transmits. We listen, we watch, we track, we do not answer. I want to tell you I understood that order as wisdom. Restraint. The mature, careful response of a civilization not rushing into a mistake. But somewhere around dawn, watching that number tick down toward a 0 4 days away, I started to wonder if silence was even a choice anymore, because the thing wasn't waiting for our answer. It was counting down to something that didn't need one. At 0612, they read us in. Not fully, never fully, but enough. A voice came onto a separate secure channel. A woman, senior. The kind of measured calm that only comes from people who've been trained to stay calm when there's a genuine reason not to be. She said she was speaking for the agency's Near-Earth Coordination Office, and that everything she was about to say was preliminary, and that we should treat it as such. Then she said the thing that I've been turning over ever since. She said the object had a file, a real file going back decades, that it had been detected quietly more than once by different instruments across different generations of astronomers, and that each time it had been logged as an anomaly, filed and forgotten because it never did anything. It just sat there, in a spot beyond the moon that shouldn't be gravitationally stable for a natural object, holding its position with a patience that no rock has. We should have looked harder, she said. It didn't want us to, so we didn't. I asked her. I don't know where I found the nerve. I asked her what she meant. It didn't want us to. She said the object's position, its edge-on orientation, its lack of reflectivity, its silence, all of it added up to something that had, in her words, minimized its own visibility with what appears to be deliberate efficiency. A rock doesn't hide. This had been hiding, successfully, for the entire span of human astronomy, and now it had stopped. She walked us through what they knew about the countdown, which wasn't much. The decreasing value was real, confirmed across every station. The rate was steady. 0 was, at current projection, 3 days and roughly 19 hours away. What happened at 0, nobody knew. She was very clear about that. She said the responsible thing was to assume nothing. But then she said something that wasn't responsible at all, and I think she said it because she was human, and it slipped out. She said, "It's not approaching." That's what I keep coming back to. Whatever this is, it's not on a collision course. It hasn't moved toward us at all. It's just announcing itself, like it's letting us watch the clock. And somebody else on the channel, some analyst, said the part she wouldn't. He said, "It waited until we could hear it. It waited until we had the technology to receive the signal. It's been out there the whole time, and it turned on the exact moment we were capable of noticing." Nobody argued with him. The briefing ended with instructions. Maintain lock, continue recording, report any change in the pulse rate or the countdown value immediately. And the standing order, restated one more time, in that calm senior voice: "No station is to transmit any reply." I acknowledged. I signed off. And then I sat alone in my little concrete room in the desert, 90 miles from anyone, with a thing beyond the moon knocking every 11 seconds, and I realized my shift was supposed to end at 7. I called my relief. He didn't pick up. I found out later they'd already locked the site down. Nobody in, nobody out. I wasn't going home at 7. I wasn't going home at all until this was over, one way or the other. I made coffee. I sat back down. And I watched the number go down. By mid-morning, they'd started sending me the historical data, and I want to walk you through it, because this is the part that changed how I understood what we were dealing with. Up to this point, I'd been treating it as an event, a thing that started at 3:14. The historical data made it clear that 3:14 wasn't a beginning. It was just the moment it decided to let us hear it. The first entry in the file was from 1961. A radio astronomer doing survey work that had nothing to do with any of this logged a spurious fixed source in a region of sky where there shouldn't have been one. He noted it, couldn't explain it, and moved on, because that's what you do with one weird data point. One weird data point is noise, but it kept showing up. Then more frequently as instruments improved. 2003, 2011, 2016. Each time a different observer, a different instrument, a different country, logging a faint fixed anomaly in the same patch of sky beyond the moon, each one treating it as their own private oddity. Nobody connected them because there was no reason to. A faint, dark object that does nothing doesn't get a working group. It gets a footnote. And here's the detail that made the back of my neck go cold. When the coordination office overlaid all those historical detections, correcting for the moon's motion and Earth's motion and everything else, the object hadn't just been present the whole time. It had been holding station, actively, to an incredible precision, for at least 64 years of human observation, and the analysts were careful to note almost certainly much longer than that, since our instruments only go back so far. 64 years of a thing sitting perfectly still in a place that requires constant tiny corrections to stay still in. That's not a rock. Rocks drift, rocks tumble. This had been parked, with its engine idling, in a spot chosen for a reason. Waiting. I asked the obvious question on the channel. Waiting for what? And an analyst younger voice, tired, honest, said the projections onto the historical data suggested something worse than a simple wait. The object's very slow modulation, the one riding under the pulse, wasn't new either. When they went back and re-examined the archived recordings, the faint modulation was there. In the old data, going all the way back to the recordings clean enough to show it. It had been counting the whole time. Not counting down. Not back then. Back then, it was counting up. Slowly. A number rising, decade by decade, so gradually that no single observation could catch the change. And at some point in the last several years, that number had crossed a threshold, and the count had reversed. Started coming down. The analyst put it plainly, and I've written his exact words in my log because I never want to forget them. He said, "It's been measuring something about us for a very long time, and it just finished." I sat with that. Measuring what? Our radio output? Our population? Our technology? The analyst didn't know. Nobody knew. But the shape of it was clear enough to make everyone on that channel very quiet. Something had been watching patiently for generations, tallying some quantity it cared about. And when the tally reached whatever value it was waiting for, it flipped the count over and started the clock down to 0. We hadn't found it. It had finished with us. I remember standing up and walking to the little window in the operations room, the one that looks out over the dish field. The morning sun was on the big antennas, and they were all pointed the same direction, all of them, at a spot in the daytime sky where you couldn't see anything at all. A whole field of enormous ears straining at a piece of empty blue. And I thought, we built these to listen to the universe. And the one time the universe listened back, it wasn't answering us. It was finishing a job it started before I was born. I went back to my desk. The pulse was still going. 11 seconds. The number still falling. 3 days, 12 hours. Something you don't expect during the end of the world is how much of it is people arguing. By noon, the coordination channel had become 2 channels, then 4, then a mess of overlapping voices, and the arguing had started in earnest. Not panic arguing, expert arguing, careful credentialed people disagreeing about what the data meant, and the disagreement was frightening in its own way, because it meant nobody actually knew. The first fight was about the size. Chile said, kilometers. A second optical facility, better positioned, came back and said the object was changing. Not moving, changing. Its profile was slowly increasing, night over night, hour over hour. It was unfolding, extending structures out from that central darkness, long, thin arms of something that reflected almost no light, spreading out into a shape one astronomer described as an aperture, like a lens opening, like an eye. Half the channel said the imaging was unreliable at that distance. The other half said the imaging was consistent across 3 instruments, and you don't get consistent artifacts across 3 different telescopes on 3 different continents. The unfolding was real. The thing was getting bigger, and it was getting bigger in a directed, structured way, and it was pointing the growing part of itself at us. The second fight was about the countdown, and it was worse. One camp held that the countdown was benign. An announcement, a courtesy, even a thing so far beyond us that it was giving us time. Time to prepare, time to gather, time to decide how to meet it. This camp kept using words like contact and arrival and opportunity. I could hear in their voices that they wanted it to be true so badly it hurt. These were people who'd spent their whole lives hoping something was out there. And now something was, and it had a clock, and they needed that clock to mean hello. The other camp said the countdown was a countdown, that you don't build a machine that hides for 64 years, measures your species, finishes its measurement, and starts a clock, unless the clock is counting down to doing something, and that whatever the something was, we should assume it was the something the machine had been built and stationed and hidden to do. Not hello, purpose. The senior woman from the coordination office cut through it. She said the argument was pointless because both camps agreed on the one fact that mattered. We couldn't stop it, we couldn't move it, and we couldn't reach it. It was 400,000 kilometers away, and we had nothing that could get there in 3 days that would matter if it did. The countdown was going to reach 0, no matter what any of us believed about it. So the only real question, she said, is what we tell people. And that started the third fight, which was the ugliest, and which I mostly stayed out of because it wasn't mine to have. Whether to make it public, when, how, whether telling 8 billion people that a thing beyond the moon had finished measuring them and started a clock would do anything except cause 3 days of chaos before the clock ran out anyway. I listened to serious, decent people argue about whether it was kinder to let the world find out or kinder to let it not. And I understood for the first time that there is no procedure for this. There's a procedure for a spacecraft anomaly. There's a procedure for a hostile launch, for a natural disaster, for a pandemic. There is no procedure for the sky has been waiting for us, and now it's ready. They were making it up, in real time, on a conference call, exhausted, and they knew it. While they argued, I watched the pulse, and I noticed something I reported immediately, because it was the first change since 3:14. The gap had shortened. Not the countdown. The pulse itself. The knock that had been coming every 11 seconds, precisely for hours it came at 10.9, then 10.8. So small you'd miss it if you weren't stacking the data. But it was speeding up. Whatever it was doing it faster now. I said so on the channel. The arguing stopped, and in the quiet, The monitor speaker knocked again, a hair sooner than it should have. At 1440, a new voice came on the secure channel, and everybody's tone changed the way a room changes when someone important walks in. I never got a name, just a designation and a manner. This was someone from far up the chain defense adjacent, I'd guess from the vocabulary. And this person was not interested in the contact opportunity theory. This person had spent the last several hours, near as I could tell, treating the object exactly like an incoming threat, because that's the framework they had. And when the only tool you've got is a threat framework, everything looks like a threat. They asked one question, over and over, in different forms. Could we affect it? Could we reach it, disrupt it, blind it, deny it? Could any asset humanity possessed touch that object before the clock hit 0? The answer, every time, was no. It was too far. Anything we launched would arrive years too late. The best we had was observation. We could watch it happen. We could not change it. And I watched a powerful person collide with that reality in real time. And it was one of the most human things I've ever heard, because they didn't accept it. They couldn't. They kept coming back to it, rephrasing, as if the right phrasing would produce a different physics. There has to be something. And the scientists kept saying, gently, there isn't. There is nothing. We are going to watch this. That's all we can do. Then the powerful voice asked the question I'd been dreading since 4 o'clock. They asked whether transmitting a reply would do anything, whether we could send something at it. Not to talk to interfere, to jam it, confuse it, corrupt its process, reach out with our biggest transmitter and shout into its ear and see if we could break the count. And the senior woman said no, firmly. She said it 3 times. Do not transmit, do not reply, do not send anything at that object. The powerful voice pushed. Why not? If we can't hurt it any other way, why not try? And she said something that shut the whole channel up. She said, because we don't know what a reply means to it. We don't know if it's waiting for one. The count started when we became capable of receiving. We do not know what happens if it learns we can also send. Right now, it thinks we're listening. That might be the only reason it's still just counting. Silence on the line. She said, the one thing we can control is that we haven't answered. That's the only card we're holding. I'm not going to let anyone play it out of fear. I have never respected anyone more than I respected her in that moment, because everyone on that channel wanted to do something. Doing something feels like control. And she stood there, with the whole weight of every frightened, powerful person leaning on her. And she chose to do nothing, on purpose, because nothing might be the wisest thing a species had ever done. The order came down hard after that, and it came to me specifically, because Cedar Flats had the cleanest lock and the best transmit capability of any station still holding the object. Under no circumstances was I to transmit. My transmit systems were to be physically saved. Someone would call to confirm I'd done it. I saved them. I pulled the enable. I confirmed it on the panel. I said so on the channel. My transmitter was cold. I could hear the object. The object could not hear me. And the pulse knocked again 10.6 seconds now, and I sat in my cold transmit room and understood that I had just agreed, on behalf of the species, to hold perfectly still and hope the thing in the dark stayed patient. It got out around 1600. Of course it got out. You can't put 4 continents of astronomers on a countdown and expect it to stay quiet. I don't know who broke it. Doesn't matter. What matters is that by late afternoon my time, the phrase was everywhere. And it was everywhere in almost exactly the form you'd expect. The form that put a cold weight in my stomach when I saw it come across an unsecured feed. NASA says the object has been waiting beyond the moon. That was the headline. That was the version the whole world got, compressed down to 9 words. And the awful thing is that it wasn't even wrong. It was just missing everything. It didn't say the object had measured us. It didn't say it had finished. It didn't say there was a clock. It just said, waiting, which sounds almost gentle, almost patient in a kind way, like something looking forward to meeting you. Nobody outside the channel knew about the countdown yet. That held for a few more hours. But waiting beyond the moon was enough. Within an hour, the world had it, and I started getting fragments of what that meant on the ground, filtered through the site's monitoring feeds. It wasn't panic at first. That surprised me. It was something stranger. It was attention. Everyone, everywhere, at once, looking up. Cities where you could see the reports of people gathering in parks and on rooftops after dark, not screaming, not looting, just standing and looking at the sky in the direction where the moon would rise, as if they could see it, which they couldn't, because it was still just an empty patch of dark. But they looked anyway. Millions of people turning their faces up at nothing, because a headline told them something was there. I understood the impulse. I'd done the same thing that morning at the window. There's a part of the human animal that has to look, even when there's nothing to see, and looking does no good. Especially then. The site director came over the internal PA around 16:30. First time I'd heard from him all day. He told us the site was under full lockdown, that our families had been notified we were safe and staying put, and that we should ignore outside media and stay on task. His voice was steady, but he stumbled once on the word families, and I heard it, and I think everyone heard it, and it made him more human than any speech could have. I hadn't thought about my family until he said the word. I'd been so deep in the signal I'd forgotten there was a world with people I loved in it. My daughter's 14. She lives with her mother in the city. I hadn't called. I couldn't call, the lines were locked, personal comms suspended. But I thought about her standing in her backyard looking up at nothing with everyone else. And something in my chest went tight and stayed tight. I went back to the console. The pulse was at 10.3 seconds now, and shortening faster than before. The countdown read 3 days, 4 hours. And on the monitor, riding under the pulse, the slow modulation had changed for the first time since I'd started watching it. The pattern inside it had shifted into something new. It had started to repeat a single short sequence, over and over, like a word. Like the object had learned one word and was practicing it, and was almost ready to say it out loud. The short sequence riding under the pulse became the only thing that mattered for the next several hours, and I had a front row seat because Cedar Flats had the cleanest recording of it, which meant the cryptanalysts wanted my raw data streamed to them continuously, which meant I got to listen in while some of the best pattern readers alive tried to figure out what a thing beyond the moon was trying to say. I'll tell you up front, they didn't fully crack it. Not in the way movies promise, where someone shouts, "I've got it," and a translation scrolls up a screen. What they got was partial and horrifying in its partiality, and I'll explain why. The sequence was structured like language. That much they were confident about within the first hour. It had the statistical fingerprints of language-repeated elements, a grammar of sorts, units that combined in constrained ways. It wasn't random, and it wasn't a simple beacon. It was information, organized the way information gets organized when a mind wants another mind to understand it. But it wasn't our language, obviously, and it wasn't math, which is what everyone expects first contact to be. The optimists on the channel had assumed any signal would open with mathematics prime numbers, the hydrogen line, the universal handshake of anyone who'd figured out physics. This wasn't that. This was structured like speech, like something that already knew how speech worked and was using that knowledge on purpose. And that raised a question that nobody wanted to ask out loud. So I'll ask it here. How does a thing that has spent 64 years silently watching us learn to send us something shaped like speech? The answer, when an analyst finally said it, was so simple it was awful. It learned from listening. For 64 years longer, it had been receiving everything we'd broadcast. Every radio show, every television signal, every phone call bounced off a satellite, every data stream leaking off our planet into the dark. It hadn't just been counting us. It had been listening to us, learning the shape of how we communicate. And now, having finished, it was speaking back in a form modeled on the only communication it had ever heard. Us. It was speaking in the shape of us. That's why the cryptanalysts could tell it was language and still couldn't read it, because it wasn't any one of our languages. It was a distillation, an average, the structure of human communication itself, extracted from decades of our chatter and rebuilt into something that carried the grammar of everything we'd ever said, without being any specific thing we'd said. Like if you listened to every human voice at once for 60 years and then tried to speak, and what came out was the ghost of all of it. They got fragments. Enough to be certain of the horror, and not enough to be certain of the meaning, which is the worst possible amount to get. The first fragment they were confident about was a self-reference, a unit that appeared at the start of nearly every repetition, in the position where, in almost every human language, you'd put I, or we, or a name. The object was identifying itself, introducing itself. Every 11, now 10 seconds, it led with "This is me." The second fragment was harder, and they fought about it for an hour, but the consensus that emerged made the channel go dead quiet. There was a unit that recurred in the position of an action, a verb, and its statistical neighbors, the units it appeared alongside, mapped most closely, across dozens of human languages, to a cluster of concepts around completion, finishing, ending, arriving at a conclusion after a long process. The object was saying over and over, roughly, "This is me, I am finishing. Not I am coming, not I am here to destroy you, not greetings, we come in peace, I am finishing." An analyst, the tired, honest one from before, said the thing that I've been unable to stop hearing. He said, "It's not talking to us. Look at the structure. There's no unit for you anywhere in it. It's not addressing us. It's announcing. Like a machine that's been running a program for a very long time, and the program is almost done, and it's just logging the completion. Out loud. Because that's the last step." We weren't being contacted. We were listening to a status report, and the status was almost done. The pulse knocked. 10.1 seconds. The countdown read 3 days even. The countdown got out overnight, and after that there was no putting anything back in any box. It went from the object is waiting to the object has a clock and the clock ends Thursday, in the space of a single news cycle. And the world I'd been watching from behind the lockdown fence stopped being merely attentive, and became something I didn't have a word for. Not panic. Panic burns out. This was slower and deeper, and it settled in and stayed. I got it in fragments, because we were still locked down, but the site let a monitoring feed run in the operations room, and I couldn't stop watching it in the gaps between pulses. Some cities emptied outward, people driving into the countryside, into the mountains, away from targets, as if there were a target, as if distance from a city would matter against a thing that had measured the entire species. Some cities filled up instead, people driving toward their families, toward the people they wanted to be near when the clock ran out, and the highways showed both at once, streams of headlights going opposite directions past each other in the dark. Everyone certain that the other direction was the mistake. The churches filled. The bars filled. The phone networks buckled under the weight of 8 billion people trying to call the people they loved at the same time. I heard that airlines kept flying, half empty, crews and passengers who decided that if it was ending, they'd rather be moving. I heard that in some places nothing changed at all, that people got up and went to work because they didn't know what else a person was supposed to do with a countdown. And going to work was the only shape their day had ever had. And everywhere, every night, the looking, the turning up of faces. Now that people knew where and when, they gathered in the dark to watch a patch of sky, and the strangest reports were of the quiet. Great crowds of people gathered under the stars, saying nothing, just watching, waiting alongside the thing that had been waiting for them. I want to be honest about my own state, because this is a record, and records should be honest. I was not calm. I was performing calm. For the log, for the channel, for myself. Underneath it, I was a man locked in a concrete building in the desert who could not call his daughter, listening to a machine older than his country announce that it was almost finished, watching the world he grew up in rearrange itself around a deadline. The site director came on the PA again that night. This time, he didn't manage steady. He told us the truth, which is more than most people in his position did. He said he didn't know what was going to happen at 0. He said nobody did. He said the work we were doing holding the lock, keeping the recording, feeding the data up the chain mattered, because if there was any chance of understanding this thing, it ran through stations like ours, and understanding was the only kind of power we had left. Then he said something off script, and I've kept it. He said, "I've been doing this job for 30 years because I wanted to be part of the moment we found out we weren't alone. I always thought it'd feel like winning." He paused. "I want you all to know I'm proud to be here with you, whatever this is." And then he clicked off, and the room was quiet except for the pulse. 10 seconds flat now. The knock had settled at exactly 10 seconds, which unsettled me more than the shortening had, because a machine that stops adjusting is a machine that's reached its final configuration. I checked the countdown. 2 days, 11 hours. And on the subcarrier, the announcement continued. "This is me. I am finishing." Over and over, patient and even, into the ears of a species standing in the dark looking up. I made more coffee. My hands, for the record, were no longer steady. I'd stopped pretending they were. At the 2-day mark, exactly, not approximately, exactly, to within the resolution of my instruments, the object did something new, and it was the first thing it did that felt aimed. The subcarrier announcement stopped. For the entire event, that slow modulation had been running underneath the pulse without a break. "This is me. I am finishing." It had become a kind of background truth, the way the hum of a refrigerator becomes background until it cuts off and the silence makes you look up. It cut off. I noticed it in the same instant 3 other stations did, and the channel lit up. For about 90 seconds there was nothing under the pulse at all. Just the carrier, the bare knock, every 10 seconds, and beneath it, silence where the announcement had been. Then a new modulation started, and this one was different in a way I felt in my body before I understood it with my mind. The old announcement had been even, uniform, the same slow, patient sequence looping without variation, a machine logging its own progress with no more feeling than a clock has. This new modulation was not uniform. It varied. It had rises and falls, clusters and gaps, a texture the old one never had. It had rhythm the way a voice has rhythm. The cryptanalysts went to work on it and came back faster than before, because it turned out to be easier to read. And the reason it was easier to read was the thing that frightened all of us. It was easier to read because it was more like us. Where the announcement had been an average of all human communication, this new signal was narrower, more specific. It had the cadence of a single language now, instead of the ghost of all of them. Our language. The dominant one on the airwaves. It had, in the space of 90 seconds, gone from speaking the abstract shape of humanity to speaking something close to a specific human tongue. It had refined itself, aimed itself, chosen a channel. And the first thing it said in that narrower voice, the first fragment they pulled with real confidence, was not, "I am finishing," anymore. It was a unit in the position of address. The "you" that had been conspicuously, chillingly absent from everything before. For 2 days it had announced itself to no one, a status report broadcast into the dark. And now, at the 2-day mark, it had turned. It had found the "you." It was, for the first time, talking to somebody. The channel erupted with the obvious question. To whom? To us. To all of us. To someone specific. And the tired analyst, who'd been right about everything, said the thing that emptied the room out. He said the address unit wasn't plural. In the grammar it had built, there was a distinction, the same distinction most human languages have between you, many, and you, one. And the object was using you, one. It wasn't addressing humanity. It was addressing an individual. Nobody knew who. The signal didn't carry a name we could read. But somewhere in that narrowed voice, aimed down out of the dark, the object had stopped logging its progress to the universe and started speaking directly to a single person. And none of us had any way to know if that person was a head of state, or a random farmer, or a child asleep in a city, or, I'm going to be honest in this record, or me, Because I was the one holding the cleanest lock. I was the one whose station it had first raised its hand to. I was the one who, at 0314, had wanted so badly to answer and had been ordered not to. I don't have evidence it was me. I want that clear. The signal wasn't aimed at Cedar Flats specifically. It was aimed at Earth. And the you, one could have been anyone. Probably wasn't me. Almost certainly wasn't me. But I sat there in the dark, at the 2-day mark, with a thing beyond the moon speaking to a single person for the first time in 64 years, and I could not make myself stop wondering who it was looking at. The pulse knocked. 10 seconds. And underneath it, the new voice, saying you into the dark. They got the rest of the sentence at hour 42, and I was on the channel when it came through, and I have never heard a group of accomplished, disciplined people go so completely silent so fast. The narrowed voice, the one addressing a single you, was not making a threat. It was not making an announcement. It was making a request. The verb they'd anchored to completion was back, but paired now with the address and with a new unit they mapped, with more confidence than I wanted them to have, to a concept cluster around permission, allowing consent, the granting of a thing that had been asked for. Put together in the roughest possible human terms, the object was saying, "This is me. I am finishing. You allow it." It was asking permission to finish. The optimists came back to life at that, and I understood why. Because on its face, it's the most hopeful thing imaginable. A power vast enough to hide beyond the moon for longer than recorded astronomy, vast enough to measure a species and speak in its distilled voice. And it was asking. It wasn't taking. It wasn't imposing. Whatever it was about to do, it had turned to a single human being and asked to be allowed. But the tired analyst, and I've come to trust his fear more than anyone's hope, pointed out the thing that killed the optimism. He said, "A request implies the possibility of refusal, and a possibility of refusal implies that our answer matters. And our answer mattering implies that this whole time, the standing order, the thing we'd clung to as our one card, do not reply." He said, "We've been treating silence as safety. What if silence isn't a refusal? What if it isn't an answer at all? What if it's the object waiting, patiently? The way it's waited for everything, for someone to actually respond, and the countdown is just how long it's willing to wait before it stops asking and simply finishes." The senior woman came on then, and her calm had a crack in it now, a real one, and she said the thing that made it official. She said, "We need to consider that the countdown is not a countdown to an action. It's a countdown to the withdrawal of a choice. It's giving someone a window to answer. And when 0 comes, the window closes, and whatever finishing means, it happens without our consent instead of with it. So now we had it. The shape of the whole thing, finally, at hour 42, with a day and a half left. An object that had waited beyond the moon since before any of us were born, that had measured us, listened to us, learned to speak in our own borrowed voice. That was going to finish something we still didn't know what, regardless of what we did. And that had, out of what might have been courtesy, or might have been procedure, or might have been something with no human equivalent at all, turned to a single unknown person and offered them a choice. Allow it, and it finishes with your consent. Refuse or stay silent, and it finishes anyway, when the clock runs out. The choice didn't change the outcome. It only changed whether we'd said yes, and every station on Earth had been ordered from the beginning to say nothing. I sat there, and I did the math the analyst had done, and I reached the place he'd reached, and I understood that we might have already made our choice by refusing to make one. The pulse knocked. 1 day, 11 hours, and for the first time all event, I put my hand on the transmit panel. The cold one, the safe one, and I left it there. I want to walk you through the next several hours honestly, because they were the hardest of my life, and because I made a decision at the end of them that I need you to understand, even if you can't forgive it. Here was my situation. My transmit systems were safed under direct order, but safed is not destroyed. Safing is a procedure, a set of interlocks, An enable pulled, and I am a communications engineer with 11 years at this station, and I knew, sitting there with my hand on the cold panel, that I could bring my transmitter back up in about 4 minutes if I chose to. I knew the sequence. I knew the overrides. Nobody had physically cut the cables, because nobody physically cutting cables had been part of anyone's plan, because the plan had assumed the operators would obey. I was the person best positioned, on the entire planet, to send a reply if a reply was ever going to be sent. Cleanest luck, best transmitter aimed most directly at the object, and a standing order not to use it. So I sat with the question that the whole species was, in some diffuse way, also sitting with, except that for me it wasn't abstract. For me there was a panel and a sequence in 4 minutes. Should someone answer? Let me give you both sides, the way I gave them to myself, out loud, into this recorder, alone in the dark. The case for silence was the case the senior woman made, and it was strong. We didn't understand the object. We didn't understand what allow it meant or what finishing meant, or what our answer would trigger. The one thing we could be sure of was that we hadn't said yes to anything. In the face of total incomprehension, the conservative move the move you make when you can't see the bottom is to keep your hands still. If answering might make it worse, and you can't rule that out, you don't answer. That's not cowardice. That's the discipline that keeps a species alive long enough to get smart. But there was a case against silence, and it had been growing in me since hour 42, and it went like this. The object had asked. Whatever it was, however alien, it had done the one thing that a purely hostile force never does. It had paused and turned and offered a choice. That gesture cost it something. It cost it the clean completion it could have had at any moment. It had waited 64 years, and it could have simply finished, silently, the way it had done everything else silently. Instead, it announced itself. It learned our voice. It aimed that voice at a single person and asked to be allowed, and we were going to answer that by hiding. The analyst's fear kept circling back. What if silence isn't a refusal? What if it's the object waiting for a response that never comes? If that was true, if the countdown was a held-open door, and our silence was just us standing in the dark, not walking through it, then when 0 came, the thing would finish without our consent, not because we'd refused, but because we'd been too frightened to say anything at all. And whatever finishing without consent meant, it might be worse than finishing with it. A machine that asks permission and receives silence might interpret that silence 1,000 ways. And we'd chosen, as a species, to gamble that it would interpret our silence gently. I didn't trust that gamble. But here's what stopped me, for hours, from touching the sequence. The senior woman's other point. We don't know what a reply means to it. The count started when we became capable of receiving. What starts when it learns we can send? That was the real terror. Not that answering was risky. That answering might be the exact thing the whole silence order existed to prevent. That the object was waiting to learn one more fact about us that we could talk back. And that the moment it learned it, everything changed. So I had 2 fears, and they pointed in opposite directions. Fear that silence would damn us. Fear that speech would damn us. And a panel between them, and 4 minutes, and a countdown that did not care which fear won. I took my hand off the panel. I decided I would not be the man who decided this alone in the dark. That decision lasted about 6 hours. The thing that broke my resolve was a message from up the chain, and it broke it not because it was frightening, but because it was so obviously the wrong answer that it told me the people above me had run out of right ones. At hour 51, the powerful defense-adjacent voice returned to the channel, and it had a plan. After 2 days of being told we could not reach the object, could not affect it, could not do anything but watch, this person had finally found something we could do, and they were determined to do it because doing something is the drug that people in power can't quit. The plan was this. Since we couldn't stop the object, and since answering it was forbidden, and since the countdown was going to reach 0 no matter what they wanted to use the world's transmitters, all of them, every dish and antenna we had, to flood the object's receiving direction with noise. Not a reply, not communication, just noise. A wall of meaningless radio static aimed at the sky to, and I'm quoting the intent, not the exact words, deny it a clean completion. To make sure that whatever it was listening for, it couldn't hear it through the interference. To jam the moment of zero. The scientists lost their minds, quietly, in the professional way scientists lose their minds. The senior woman said it was insane. She said we'd spent the entire event being disciplined enough not to transmit, precisely because we didn't know what transmitting would do, and now, in the final hours, we wanted to transmit the loudest, ugliest, most aggressive signal possible, directly at the one thing we least understood. She said if a reply was dangerous, a scream was worse. She said you don't respond to a patient request for permission by screaming static into the asker's face and hoping it gets confused. The powerful voice said it wasn't a reply. It was a denial, and that a species should go out fighting rather than standing quietly in a field waiting to be finished. And that phrase, go out fighting, was when I understood that the people above me had, in their hearts, already decided we were going to die. The jamming plan wasn't a survival plan. It was a way to feel like we'd resisted. It was the equivalent of shaking your fist at the sky. It wouldn't change zero. It would just let us tell ourselves we hadn't gone quietly. They argued for an hour. The jamming plan didn't get approved. Too many stations refused. Too many scientists screamed. And in the end, nobody had the authority to force every antenna on Earth to do anything in the time remaining. But it didn't get formally rejected either. It just sat there, half alive, waiting for the last hours when discipline would fray, and someone somewhere would decide to do it anyway. And that's what changed my mind. Not the object, us. Because I realized that when zero got close, humanity's answer to the request was not going to be dignified silence, the careful restraint the senior woman had fought for. It was going to be chaos. Some stations would jam. Some would go dark. Some panicked operator somewhere would fire off a reply out of terror or hope or grief. Unfiltered, ungoverned. Speaking for all of us without any of us choosing him. The object had asked a question, and the human response was going to be a mess of static and screaming and silence and accident. A garbage answer assembled from 8 billion frightened people and their governments. And that garbage was going to be the message our species sent back to the first thing that ever spoke to us. I decided that if someone was going to answer for humanity, it should at least be someone who'd listened to the whole thing, who'd been there since 314, who understood, as well as any single person could, what was being asked. I looked at the panel. 14 hours to zero. I started this sequence to bring my transmitter back up. I want to be exact about what I did and why, because this is the part that matters, and because if this recording survives, I want it clear that I was not acting out of panic. I was slow. I was deliberate. I did it the way I've done everything at this station for 11 years, which is carefully. I brought the transmitter up. 4 minutes and change. Override by override. Interlock by interlock. Nobody stopped me, because nobody was watching my specific panel in the middle of a global crisis. And because the whole architecture of the safing order had assumed my obedience rather than enforcing my inability. I had the warmest, cleanest, best-aimed transmitter on the planet, pointed straight at a thing beyond the moon, and I had, at last, decided to use it. But I did not send static. I want that on the record above everything else. Whatever the people above me wanted, I would not scream at it. If the object had turned to a single person and asked, with what patience and courtesy an alien machine could manage, to be allowed to finish, then screaming was the one answer I was sure was wrong. You don't answer a request with an assault. And I did not send yes either, because I still didn't know what I'd be consenting to, and I would not sign the species up for an outcome I couldn't see. I sent a question. I know how small that sounds. 64 years of waiting, a species on the edge, a countdown in single digits of hours, and my great contribution was to ask the thing what it meant. But think about what we'd never done. In all the arguing about whether to say yes or stay silent or scream, nobody had proposed the simplest human thing in the world, which is to say, "I don't understand. Please explain." The object had learned our voice by listening to us for decades, so I would speak to it the way you speak to something you want to understand. I encoded a reply using the same structure it had used to address the single you. I had the cleanest recording of that grammar. I could mirror it, and into that borrowed structure I put the concept units the cryptanalysts had mapped. Self-reference, this is me. Address, you. One turned back on it, because if it could speak to one of us could speak to it. And then, instead of permission or refusal, the unit cluster around incomprehension and the one around request combined the way it had combined them. In the roughest human terms, aimed up out of the dark at 10-second intervals to match its own pulse, I sent, "This is me. You I do not understand. Explain finishing." Then I stopped, and I waited. And I did not tell the channel what I'd done, because I knew they'd order me to stop. And I knew that if a reply was going to come, ordering me to stop now was pointless. The signal was already climbing away from Earth at the speed of light. Already more than a second gone, already past the point where any human authority could recall it. It takes light a little over a second to reach the object, so the round trip, at minimum, was just under 3 seconds. I counted. 3 seconds. Nothing. 10 seconds the pulse knocked, unchanged. 30 seconds. A minute. The pulse kept its rhythm. The countdown kept falling, and I sat there having done the forbidden thing, having answered on behalf of everyone and gotten nothing back. And I thought, maybe that's the answer. Maybe it doesn't care. Maybe I screamed into a hurricane and the hurricane didn't notice. At 2 minutes and 11 seconds, the pulse stopped. Not shortened, not shifted. Stopped. For the first time since 0314, the knock did not come. The monitor speaker went silent, and the silence after all those hours of rhythm was the loudest thing I have ever heard. The channel exploded, every station reporting the same thing at once. The pulse gone worldwide. And then, into that silence, on my transmitter's exact frequency, aimed at Cedar Flats, at me, came a new signal. It answered. The reply was short, and the cryptanalysts and I read it together in real time, and I'm going to tell you what we agreed it said, with the caveat that has hung over every translation in this event. We got the shape of it, not the certainty. It used my structure. It mirrored me the way I'd mirrored it, which meant it had received my message, understood that I'd asked a question, and chosen to respond in kind. Whatever it was, it could converse. It had been waiting patiently, its whole long vigil, for someone to stop broadcasting at it and actually speak to it. And the moment one human being finally did, it answered inside of 3 seconds, like something that had been holding its breath for 64 years. The self-reference came first, the same one it had used from the start. This is me. Then the completion unit, the finishing. And then it did something it had never done. It added units we hadn't seen before, but we could read them, partially, because by now we had enough of its grammar to guess, and because it had clearly chosen concepts it knew we could decode, building its answer out of the pieces it had already taught us. The cluster it used for finishing, paired with the new units, did not map to destruction. It didn't map to arrival or invasion or harvest. The nearest human concept cluster and 3 separate cryptanalysts reached it independently, which is the only reason I half believe it was around observation. Watching. The completion of a period of watching. And the new unit, the one it added just for this answer, mapped most closely to a concept cluster around departure. Leaving, going. Put together, in the roughest, most uncertain human terms, the object answered my question, explained finishing with something like, "This is me." Finishing watching, departing. It wasn't ending us. It was ending its watch of us. For 64 years, longer, it had been stationed beyond the moon doing exactly one thing: observing, measuring, listening, waiting for some condition to be met, maybe are reaching the point where we could hear it, maybe something we'll never understand, and when that condition was met, its task was complete. The countdown wasn't counting down to an action against us. It was counting down to the end of the assignment, and the request for permission, the allow it, I think, and I'll never be sure, that it was asking to be released, asking the thing it had watched for so long whether it could go. A courtesy, or a formality, or something with no human equivalent at all, asking permission to stop watching us and leave. And in all the days of the event, out of the entire species, exactly one person had answered, and the answer we'd almost given, the answer the powerful voices wanted, was static and screaming and denial. We had almost jammed a thing that only wanted to say goodbye. I sat in the dark, and I read departing on my screen, and I did the only thing left that felt human. I sent one more message. Not a question this time. I built it from the units it had taught me, the self-reference and the address, and one more concept cluster I had to assemble from fragments and hope it could read. I sent, "This is me. You go well." I don't know if "go well" survived the translation. I don't know if the concept of a kind farewell means anything to whatever that was. But 3 seconds later, the object answered one final time. And what it sent back, we could read completely, because it was the simplest thing it had ever said. It sent back my own structure, unchanged, reflected perfectly. "This is me. You go well." It left at 0, right on the clock. Whatever else it was, it kept its schedule to the end. I didn't see it go. Not with my eyes. It was a daytime sky over the desert, an empty patch of blue where a thing had been waiting since before my grandfather was born. But every instrument on the planet aimed at it caught the same thing, and I caught it cleanest, because I still had the best lock, right up until there was nothing left to lock onto. At 0, the object began to move. Not toward us, away. It accelerated in a direction out of the plane of everything, out toward the deep dark, at a rate that made the physicists on the channel stop talking mid-word because the numbers didn't fit anything we can do or understand. It unfolded the rest of the way as it went. The optical stations caught the aperture, the lens, the eye, opening fully one last time, and then turning. And the turning was the part I'll carry forever. Because for its entire vigil it had faced us. Edge on when it wanted to hide, aperture open when it wanted to watch. And at the end, it turned that opening away from Earth, toward wherever it was going, the way a person turns to leave a room they've been sitting in for a very long time. And then it was faster than we could track, and then it was a smear, and then it was gone, and the sky beyond the moon was just sky. The pulse never came back. The silence it left is still here, hours later, and it's a different silence than before. Before 3:14, the sky was silent because we assumed nothing was there. Now it's silent because something was there, for longer than we've been a species. And it watched us, and it finished, and it left, and it told exactly one frightened man in a concrete building in the desert to go well before it went. I have not been arrested. I keep expecting to be. I disobeyed a direct standing order, brought a safe transmitter online, and answered on behalf of the entire human race, without permission from anyone. The channel knows it was Cedar Flats. They know it was me. But so far, no one has come, and I think it's because they don't know whether to court-martial me or thank me. Because the truth that no one on that channel will say out loud is that my question got the only real answer anyone got. All their discipline, all their careful silence, all the powerful men who wanted to scream static at the sky, none of it produced a single word. One man asking, "What do you mean produced a conversation?" I keep thinking about the you, one, the single person it addressed at the 2-day mark, before I ever touched the panel. I told myself it wasn't me. It probably wasn't. It was aimed at Earth, not at Cedar Flats. But it answered me in under 3 seconds, like it had been waiting. And it turned to leave only after I told it to go well. I don't have evidence. I'll never have evidence. But I think it had picked someone to talk to. A long time ago, and I think it was patient enough to wait until he was brave enough to answer. It's morning now. Real morning, the ordinary kind. The sun coming up over the dish field the way it has every day I've worked here. And the antennas are still all pointed at that empty patch of sky out of pure institutional habit, aimed at nothing, at where something used to be. They've unlocked the site. I called my daughter 20 minutes ago. First thing I did. She picked up on the second ring and she was crying, and I was crying, and neither of us said anything smart or important for a while. She'd stood in the backyard with her mother every night of the event, looking up the way everyone did. She asked me if I'd been scared. I said yes. She asked me if it was over. I said yes. She asked me what it was, and I didn't know how to tell my 14-year-old that a thing older than our whole civilization had been sitting beyond the moon since before either of us was born, watching, measuring, learning our voice from our own leaking chatter, and that when it was finally done it asked to be allowed to leave, and that, out of 8 billion people, her father was the one who answered. I don't know how to tell anyone that. I'm barely telling it now, to a recorder, to whoever finds this. So I told her the true small version. I told her something came a very long way, and stayed a very long time, and watched over us. And then it went home. And she said, "Was it nice?" And I thought about go well. Reflected back to me perfect and complete across 250,000 miles. And I said, "Yeah, I think it was." I'm going to end this record now. My hands are steady again genuinely, this time not for the log. I've been up for over 3 days and I should feel destroyed, but I don't. I feel like a man who was handed something enormous and didn't drop it. I don't expect that feeling to last. Tomorrow I'll start being afraid of the things you're supposed to be afraid of. The questions we can't answer. The meaning of a watcher that watched us for 64 years and found whatever it was looking for. Whether it'll tell others, whether others will come, whether go well was a goodbye or a see you later. But that's tomorrow's fear. Today, the sky is empty and ordinary and ours again. And my daughter's voice is in my ear. And somewhere out past the moon, a thing that waited its whole existence to be spoken to is carrying 4 human words into the dark. This is me. You go well. I don't know what I gave it. I gave it a question and a kindness, and it gave me back the same, and then it left, and maybe that's all first contact ever needed to be. Not power, not fear, just somebody finally answering. This is Marcus Vale, Cedar Flats, signing off. The sky's clear. We're still here.